What's up, everyone? Here are 6 signs that what you're doing in an argument is emotional and not rational or logical. Let's jump right into it. So the first sign that you're being emotional and not rational or logical is this: if you have an inability to present a rational argument against whatever your perspective is. So we all like to be able to say that as long as we're alive, we still have more to learn. And that's all well and good to say. But to actually live that means that when someone disagrees with your perspective, if you really do believe that you have more to learn, then why would you become defensive if someone disagrees with your perspective? It is possible that that person is seeing something that you have not quite fully seen or understood just yet. So when you're engaged in a discussion or an argument with someone else, be mindful that if you're not able to present a rational challenge to your own ego, to your own perspective, then you are likely arguing from a place of emotion and irrationality rather than from a place of reason and intellect. The second way you can tell whether or not your arguments are emotional and not logical or rational is this: if you are willing to categorize, label, and define others by the worst member of their group, but you're not willing to be defined, characterized, and labeled by the worst member of someone who identifies as a part of your group, then you're being emotional and irrational rather than logical and intellectual. So think about this. Oftentimes, we think about this in terms of a Venn diagram. So you might point out, if you're in one side of this Venn diagram, you might point out the absolute worst representation of a member of a group, of this other group, and then you label everyone in that entire group and define them by that worst representation. And at the same time, they can easily do that for you, but you won't accept that. You won't be labeled or categorized or defined by the worst representative of your own group. And that's okay. None of us need to be defined or represented or categorized by the worst member of our group. That's fine and all well and good. However, when you do that to other people, then you can know that you are very much being emotional and irrational, and you're not being logical and intellectual. So that's a great way to understand that. The third sign that your arguments are emotional and not logical or intellectual occurs when you use extreme language. So very rarely are extreme words actually accurate. Oftentimes you might hear a young person say, "Nobody around here ever listens to me," or "Everything is going terribly today." And so when we use words like nobody, everything, everyone, all the time, never, these are extreme words, and extreme words produce extreme emotions. So if you find yourself using extreme words, and instead of trying to rationalize those extreme words, well, yes, but, or I didn't mean those words, understand that your argument is, in fact, emotional. If you want to be intellectual and rational and logical, then you'll want to be accurate with your language. And anytime you infuse extreme words, you don't get to say, well, yes, but I didn't mean it, or you know what I meant. It is important to be logical, to be accurate with your language. The fourth sign that you are being emotional and not intellectual in an argument is when you argue from a place of saying something to the effect of, I just know it. I can't explain it. I just know it. Okay, that's all well and good. I'm not saying that you don't have any kind of a truth to whatever you're experiencing. However, this has left the realm of logic and reason and intellect. In the moment when you describe something as, I just can't describe it, I just know it, you just have to trust me, that's a real emotional argument. The fifth sign that you are arguing from a place of emotion and not reason or intellect occurs when you discount someone's perspective based on something that they didn't even say. So oftentimes you'll see in an argument, someone will say, oh, so what you're really saying is this. And then they go off on whatever they created in their mind and then attack that. But that has nothing to do with what the argument actually was. And it's interesting to watch this unfold or to observe it, because people essentially are creating their own argument and then they're arguing against it, but it had nothing to do with what the other person presented. And this kind of parallels a concept I call shower arguments. If you've ever been in an argument with someone in your mind when you're in the shower, maybe you're tearing this person up, right? You're ripping apart their whole argument. And by the time you get out of the shower, you think, man, I got them. Like I told them, they don't know anything. And then it hits you that you're in the shower, you're in their bathroom by yourself. You weren't arguing with anyone. You just created an argument in your own mind, and then you defeated that argument. But that's much like playing chess with yourself. Of course, you're going to win every time, but also, of course, you're going to lose every time as well. So be mindful that when you are arguing or having a discussion with others and you start to counter what they're not saying, and you start to say, well, but what you're really saying is, or so what you mean is this, and then you change it, and then you argue against it. Now, again, you're no longer being rational or intellectual or logical. In those moments, it comes to the reality that in those moments you're being emotional. Again, all of this is well and good. Whatever you want to do is fine, but this is just to give you a heads up. It's a guideline for understanding when you're being emotional and maybe your ego is convincing you that you're being rational or logical, but you're not. You're being emotional. The sixth sign that you are being emotional and not intellectual or logical or rational is this: you downplay or minimize your own hypocrisy. In other words, you are able to, you point out other people's hypocrisy. You might point out what other people are doing, but then when they point out the hypocrisy that you do, you just downplay that, minimize that. Well, we're not talking about that. And then it just becomes in the space of emotion, again, no longer intellect. And this is a powerful one, because oftentimes when you watch people argue hot topics, what they do is they downplay or minimize their own hypocrisy, the things that they're doing and how their own arguments are contradictory. But again, it's all well and good. Whatever you want to do is fine. You just want to be mindful not to trick yourself into believing that you're being intellectual or rational or logical. Because in those moments when you downplay and minimize your own hypocrisy, you're actually being very emotional. Look, I really believe this. We all have an ego. It's just human nature, right? We have an ego. Our ego is our sense of who we are. It's not who we actually are. It's our sense of who we are. And we oftentimes defend our egos. We want to be right no matter what. And we would oftentimes rather be right than happy. But the truth is that our egos are not who we are. And it is important to challenge our own egos. So many people will say so quickly with lip service, as long as I'm alive, I still have more to learn. But heaven help you if you disagree with them, because they will become defensive really quickly. But I thought a moment prior they were saying that they have more to learn. So if you really do believe that you have more to learn, then you will be open and ready to learn in every given moment. If you're not right about something, if your perspective isn't complete, that doesn't make you less of a person. It simply means you're a human being and your perspective is not entirely complete. I like to think of the concept of understanding all of this through the idea of a box. As human beings, we can only ever see one or two sides of a box in a given moment. And our egos like to convince us that we've been all around the box and we know all sides of it. But the reality is, if something is popping up on one side of the box that we're not in front of, then there's no way for us to know that that's happening with certainty. And so it's important for us to lead with humility and recognize that as long as we're alive, we really do have more to learn. And also recognize that when you argue with others, that you are trying to convince them that your side is correct and you need them to believe what you want them to believe, then you're missing out on the really powerful and beautiful opportunity to have a true intellectual, academic, logical, rational discussion. But the moment you engage with people and you need them to see your side, you need them to believe what you believe, think what you think, feel what you feel, do what you want them to do, then A, I believe you've already lost, and B, you have thrown out intellect and reason out the window. And at that point, it's all about emotion. So listen, if you want to stay emotional in your arguments and disagreements, that's your prerogative, that's your right. But if you want to push yourself, to challenge yourself to grow intellectually, psychologically, personal growth is beautiful. And if you want to push yourself, well, then consider these guidelines, because the more mindful you are of them, the less likely you are to make the mistake of operating from emotions and trying to convince yourself or others that you're being logical. Hey, I really hope this helps. Until next time, as always, I wish you much peace.